A Target parking lot in Ventura, California. The afternoon sun bleeds across rows of parked cars, casting long shadows that stretch like dark fingers. Shoppers drift in and out, pushing carts, clutching receipts, trapped in the mundane rhythm of an ordinary Monday afternoon. A 35-year-old mother walks toward her vehicle, keys jingling in her hand. Then a blonde woman appears, short, authoritative, and she's carrying something that catches the light, a badge, gleaming, handcuffs cold and metallic. The mother is guided almost gracefully into a blue-green Nissan Altima. No screaming, no struggle. The witnesses barely glance up. Why would they? They've just witnessed what looks like a textbook police arrest. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, except the blonde woman isn't a police officer. And this isn't an arrest. By the time anyone realizes what actually unfolded in that parking lot, Sherry Dally will have vanished into thin air. And the woman who took her? She's been sleeping with Sherry's husband for months. Hi, I'm Michael. Today I bring you another unreal true crime investigation. If you're a fan of true crime and criminal investigations, you won't want to miss our new book, The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers, 180 Files of the World's Most Notorious Murderers, now available on Amazon. You can also purchase the PDF version directly from our website for instant download. You'll find the link in the video description and in a pinned comment. Now let's dive into today's case. Sherry Renee Dally was born and raised in Southern California during a time when families still left their doors unlocked and children played in the streets until dark. She was a woman who had built her entire life around one fundamental value, taking care of others. At 35 years old, Sherry lived in Ventura, a coastal city about an hour north of Los Angeles. It was the kind of place where people know each other by name, where neighbors wave while picking up the morning paper, where violent tragedies simply don't happen. Or so everyone thought. Sherry was a mother of 2 young boys who were the absolute center of her universe. In addition to raising her own children, she operated a home daycare, a small business that had become an essential lifeline for several families in the neighborhood. Parents trusted her with their most precious possessions, their kids. Kristen Olson, a local mother, had been leaving her children in Sherry's care since 1988. 8 years of absolute trust. 8 years of watching Sherry treat every child who walked through her door as if they were her own. Her neighbors and the families who depended on her consistently described Sherry with the same words: warm, devoted, reliable. She was the type of person who remembered everyone's birthdays, who baked cookies for school meetings, who always had a moment to listen to other people's problems, even when her own were piling up. According to later testimony, she kept a notebook where she wrote down everything she wanted to do someday. Big dreams and small ones, trips she wanted to take, experiences she wanted to share with her sons when they were older. She was a woman who looked toward the future with hope. But there was something not everyone knew. Behind that facade of suburban normalcy, behind the smiles at parent meetings and quiet afternoons at the park, Sherry was fighting a silent battle to hold together a family that was crumbling from the inside. Sherry was married to Michael Dally, a man most people in the community only knew superficially. Michael worked as a clerk at a local grocery store. At first glance, he seemed like an ordinary family man. He went to work, came home, mowed the lawn on weekends. Nothing remarkable, nothing alarming. But appearances, as we would later learn, can be the most effective disguise of all. John Avila had known Michael since childhood. They had grown up together, been friends for decades. What Avila described in his later testimony painted a disturbing portrait of transformation. According to his words, Michael went from being a polite and respectful young man, even an altar boy at his local Catholic church, to someone completely different. Avila testified that Michael had gotten involved with drugs, specifically crack cocaine, and that he frequented prostitutes. He remembered that Sherry lived in fear, that he himself had advised her multiple times to leave Michael, to take the kids and get out before things got worse. But Sherry stayed. Like so many women in similar situations, she held on to hope that things would improve. She feared the unknown. She felt the pressure to maintain a complete family for her children. So she stayed, and she endured. The Dallys' financial situation was another constant source of tension. Sherry had been forced to pull her children out of their private school because the family could no longer afford the tuition. It was a decision that had devastated her, according to people close to her. Meanwhile, according to testimony that would emerge during the trial, Michael continued spending money on his personal vices. And then there was the other matter, the secret that ran like silent poison through the veins of that marriage. Michael Dally had a co-worker named Diana Haun. They worked together in the deli section of the same grocery store day after day, shift after shift, slicing ham, preparing salads, chatting about their lives, their frustrations, their unfulfilled desires. Diana was approximately the same age as Sherry. She was short in stature with a quiet, almost childlike demeanor. Some saw her as vulnerable, as someone who needed protection. But there was another side to Diana that few people knew. An extensive profile published by the Los Angeles Times revealed that she had a fascination with the occult and the strange. Friends and acquaintances mentioned that she could shift from being completely docile to having explosive outbursts of temper without warning, as if some internal switch had suddenly flipped. Diana carried her own history of trauma. As a teenager, a basketball backboard collapsed and fell on her during a game. The impact was so severe that she was in a coma for 3 days. Doctors didn't know if she would survive. She survived, and as a result of the accident, she received a legal settlement that guaranteed her more than $1,000 a month until age 65. Over her lifetime, that annuity would be worth close to $1 million. This really caught my attention when I was researching the case. Diana wasn't someone in desperate financial straits. She had a guaranteed income for life. Whatever motivated her wasn't about economic survival. It was something deeper, darker, more complex. The relationship between Michael and Diana became an open secret at work. Coworkers noticed them whispering during breaks, exchanging meaningful glances, taking the same shifts with suspicious frequency, and Sherry knew. According to close friends who would testify later, Sherry was fully aware of her husband's affair, but instead of confronting him, instead of demanding a divorce, she tried to keep her family together. She kept cooking dinners. She kept driving the kids to school. She kept smiling in public while falling apart on the inside. Why? Perhaps for the children. Perhaps because of hope. Perhaps because the devil you know always seems less terrifying than the devil you don't. May 6th, 1996 began like any other Monday for Sherry Dally. She woke up early, as always. She prepared breakfast for her boys, helped them get dressed, made sure they had everything they needed for the day ahead. Running a daycare from home meant her morning routine was a carefully choreographed ballet of maternal efficiency. The May sun in Southern California is warm but still gentle. Not the crushing heat of summer that would arrive in a few weeks. It was the kind of day that invites you to run errands, to get out of the house, to make the most of the daylight hours. At some point in the afternoon, Sherry got in her car and drove to the Target located on East Main Street in the commercial heart of Ventura. It was a store she knew well, part of her regular shopping circuit. She probably needed something for the daycare, perhaps household supplies, maybe just a break from the daily routine. The Target parking lot was moderately busy that afternoon. Families coming and going with carts, employees collecting shopping carts, the constant flow of an ordinary commercial afternoon. What happened in that parking lot was witnessed by several people, but none of them understood what they were seeing. None of them thought they should intervene. A blonde woman, short in stature, approached Sherry near her vehicle. The woman carried something that glinted in the sun, a badge. In her hand, a pair of metal handcuffs reflected the afternoon light. The scene that followed looked like something out of any cop show on television. The blonde woman spoke to Sherry, showed her the badge, and guided her toward a Nissan Altima parked nearby. The car was a distinctive color, blue-green, almost teal. Sherry got into the vehicle. There were no screams. There was no visible struggle. Nothing indicated that what witnesses were seeing was a kidnapping rather than a routine arrest. Why would there be? They had just witnessed what appeared to be exactly what any police officer would do with any suspect in any parking lot of any city in the United States. The badge was convincing. The handcuffs were real. The blonde woman's confidence was absolute. The blue-green Nissan Altima pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared into the afternoon traffic. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Sherry Dally alive and knew who she was. The hours passed. Sherry didn't come home for dinner. Her phone rang and rang without answer. At first, her family thought about traffic problems, about some minor delay, about any mundane explanation that didn't involve the unthinkable. But when night fell completely and the silence continued, when the children asked where Mommy was and nobody knew what to say, fear began to settle in like a thick fog that would not lift. Sherry's family reported her missing the following day. The Ventura Police Department, a force more accustomed to handling petty thefts and vandalism than violent disappearances, began an investigation that would quickly take a dark turn. Detectives, including Sergeant Gary McCaskill, who would lead much of the case, began gathering basic information. Where was she last seen? Who did she talk to? Was there anything unusual about her recent behavior? The witnesses from the Target parking lot provided consistent descriptions. Blonde woman, short, badge, handcuffs, blue-green Nissan Altima. The vehicle description became the key piece of evidence. Investigators traced the car. It was a rental. The rental agreement was in the name of Diana Haun. She had rented it on May 5th, the day before Sherry's disappearance, and returned it on May 7th, the day after. Unlike many cases where the connection between suspect and victim is murky, here the relationship was direct and explosive. Diana Haun was the mistress of the missing woman's husband. When investigators examined the interior of the returned vehicle, they found what they feared. bloodstains on the seats. The rearview mirror was damaged, as if someone had struck it or torn it off during a violent struggle. The inside of the car told a story of violence that completely contradicted the image of a calm arrest that the witnesses had observed. The Ventura community mobilized in a way that still moves me when I read the news reports from that time. Friends, neighbors, and family members of Sherry organized massive searches during Memorial Day weekend. John Avila, the childhood friend of Michael who had advised Sherry to leave her husband, was one of the main organizers. Hundreds of volunteers combed the rural areas around Ventura, following any lead, any rumor, any hope. In a moment of desperation that illustrates how far a family will go searching for answers, they even consulted a psychic. The woman told them the body would be found near water, but not the ocean. A vague clue, but in the absence of anything better, they clung to it. On June 1st, 1996, almost a month after the disappearance, a group of volunteers arrived at Canada Larga Road. It's a winding path that snakes north of Ventura, heading into the mountains. The terrain is rugged, with deep ravines covered in chaparral and dense vegetation typical of Southern California. Then they smelled it. The unmistakable smell of decomposition is something that, according to those who have experienced it, you never forget. The volunteers descended with ropes into a steep ravine. First, they found the sunglasses, then pieces of clothing, and then at the bottom of that forgotten ravine, they found the remains of Sherry Dally. Official identification was made using dental records on June 3, 1996. What the medical examiner documented was devastating. Sherry had been brutally beaten and stabbed multiple times. One of the stab wounds went directly into her heart. But that wasn't all. The coroner found evidence that someone had attempted to decapitate her using a flat, sharp object, possibly a small hatchet or similar tool. This detail, the partial decapitation, would become a crucial element later, when certain questions from a certain person would reveal knowledge that nobody should have had. While Sherry lay in that ravine, while animals and weather did their work on her remains, while her family searched for her desperately, life at the Dally household continued on a disturbingly normal course. Or at least, that's what Michael Dally wanted everyone to believe. Michael didn't show the reaction you would expect from a husband whose wife had just mysteriously disappeared. There were no uncontrollable tears like we see in truly devastated spouses. There was no frantic desperation of someone who doesn't know where their partner is. The detectives who interviewed him noted his strangely controlled composure, as if he were reciting lines from a script he had rehearsed. About a week after Sherry's disappearance, Michael Dally walked into the local courthouse and filed for legal separation from his wife. 1 week. His wife hadn't even been found yet. Nobody knew if she was alive or dead, and he was already preparing the paperwork to divorce her. What I find incredible is that he thought this was going to work, that the police wouldn't notice, that filing separation papers while your wife is missing wouldn't raise exactly the kind of red flags it raised. But the truly revealing moment, what sealed the investigators' perception of Michael Dally, came after the body was found. When detectives went to inform him that they had found his wife's remains, Michael asked questions that chilled the blood of the investigators present, questions that nobody in his situation would ask. Questions that revealed impossible knowledge. He asked if Sherry's head was still attached to her body. He asked about a specific necklace she had been wearing. These details had not been made public. The police hadn't revealed the condition of the body to the press or even to the family yet. The attempted decapitation was classified investigation information. How could Michael know about the condition of his wife's head unless he knew exactly what had happened to her? Investigators also discovered another fascinating and disturbing detail: the secret communication system between Michael and Diana. In 1996, cell phones were still not ubiquitous. People used pagers, those small devices that received numerical messages you then had to decode. Michael and Diana had created an entire language of codes. Michael's identification number was 666, the biblical number of the beast. Diana's was 4949. They had codes for love forever, complete messages compressed into sequences of digits. It was, in essence, the precursor to text messaging, but designed specifically to hide an illicit relationship, and, as police increasingly suspected, to coordinate something far worse. Diana Haun was arrested for the first time on May 18, 1996, even before Sherry's body was found. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The car rented in her name, the bloodstains inside, the witness testimonies describing a short blonde woman using a badge and handcuffs. Everything pointed to her. The investigators were certain they had their primary suspect, but then something happened that enraged Sherry's family and shocked the community. Authorities released Diana Haun, citing insufficient evidence to file formal charges. Without a body, without confirmation of death, the prosecution didn't feel comfortable proceeding. This is the point where, in my opinion, the pressure on the detectives became immense. They had let a suspect go, they had a terrified community, they had to build a case that could hold up before a jury. The discovery of the body on June 1st changed the entire legal landscape. Now they had a confirmed homicide case. DNA testing, still relatively new technology in criminal investigations in 1996, confirmed that the blood found in the rented Nissan Altima belonged to Sherry Dally. The circumstantial evidence began to pile up. The car rental, the blood, the witnesses, the relationship with the victim's husband, Michael's impossible questions about the body. On August 1st, 1996, Diana Haun was arrested again. This time, there would be no early release. On August 16th, a grand jury formally indicted her on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. But investigators knew Diana hadn't acted alone. The entire scenario required planning, knowledge of Sherry's schedule, information about her movements. Someone had to provide that intelligence, someone who knew Sherry intimately. On November 15, 1996, Michael Dally was arrested and charged with the same crimes. The prosecution maintained that he had planned his wife's murder together with his lover. The testimonies painted a devastating portrait of Michael. Friends and acquaintances described his transformation from respectable young man to someone involved with drugs and prostitution. They detailed his coldness, his suspicious questions about the condition of Sherry's body, his hasty filing for separation. The prosecutors argued that Michael feared a divorce would ruin him financially. There were questions about life insurance and economic benefits. What I found in the court records left me speechless. This wasn't just a crime of passion. This was a calculated plan. Diana Haun was tried first. Her trial became a media spectacle, with local press covering every detail, every witness, every revelation. The prosecution presented Diana as a calculating and greedy woman willing to kill to keep the man she loved. They painted a picture of obsession, of a woman so consumed by her desire for Michael that she would eliminate anyone standing in her way. The defense tried to portray her as a manipulated person, a victim of Michael's charms and manipulations. They suggested she was vulnerable, damaged by her childhood head injury, susceptible to the influence of a controlling man. In a jail interview during the deliberations of Michael's trial, Diana called her former lover a psychotic. She claimed to be innocent. She denied having practiced witchcraft, a rumor that had circulated during the case and that added a bizarre element to an already disturbing story. On September 26, 1997, the jury declared Diana Haun guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. On November 24th, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael Dally went to trial in 1998. His case was more complex because he wasn't physically present during the kidnapping and murder. The prosecution had to prove he had been the mastermind behind the crime. The testimonies were devastating. Friends described his transformation from respectable young man to someone involved with drugs and prostitution. They detailed his coldness, his suspicious questions about Sherry's body, his hasty separation filing while his wife was still missing. The pager codes became particularly damning evidence. 666 as his identifier. The coded love messages, the communication system designed for secrecy. It all painted a picture of two people coordinating in the shadows. On April 6, 1998, Michael Dally was declared guilty of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. The sentencing phase was dramatic. The prosecution sought the death penalty, but the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision and deadlocked. As a result, Michael received the same sentence as Diana, life in prison without the possibility of parole. If you ask me, the sentence seems appropriate given the context. What matters is that both will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. They will never get out. They will never breathe free air again. After the convictions, Sherry's children were placed in the care of their maternal grandparents. A judge awarded the boys a $6.4 million judgment against Diana Haun in a wrongful death civil lawsuit. Much of that money would come from the annuity Diana received for her teenage accident. The irony isn't lost on me. The money she received for her own tragedy would compensate for the tragedy she caused. In 2001, an appellate court upheld Michael Dally's conviction, though they eliminated an aggravating circumstance related to lying in wait because it didn't affect his life sentence either way. In 2023, Diana Haun attempted to request resentencing under new California laws. The court determined she was ineligible because she was the actual killer, not merely an accomplice. She was the one who wore the badge. She was the one who clicked the handcuffs. This case affected me more than I expected. There's something about the image of Sherry being led away in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses who thought they were seeing something legitimate, that got stuck in my head and won't leave. This reminds me of other cases we've covered where blind trust in authority figures allowed predators to act with impunity. It's a pattern we see again and again. The uniform, the badge, the confidence. and we just comply. We don't question. We don't intervene. Sherry was a woman who dedicated her life to caring for others. She cared for her children. She cared for her neighbors' children. She tried to hold together a family that didn't deserve her loyalty, and in the end, it was the trust of strangers, their willingness not to question a figure of authority, that allowed her killer to take her from this world without anyone lifting a hand to help. Sometimes I think about those witnesses in the Target parking lot, about how they must have felt when they learned the truth, about how that moment of passivity must haunt them still. Sherry was 35 years old. She had dreams. She had that notebook where she wrote down everything she wanted to do someday. Those somedays never came. If this case left you thinking like it did me, tell me in the comments which part impacted you the most. I love reading your reflections and theories about these cases, and if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, from learning about the dangers of trusting blindly, share it. Sometimes the difference between life and death is a question we decide not to ask. Thanks for tuning in to She Tells Crime YouTube channel. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.